All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I am the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and I've recorded more than 5,000 interviews going back to 2003, all of which are available at scotthorton.org. You can also sign up for the podcast feed. The full archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Matt Agorist. He's really one of the most important writers in America, I think. He writes at the Free Thought Project, and I beseech you to sign up for their afternoon email list. You'll then understand why I am so bent out of shape all the time. Welcome back to the show. How are you doing, Matt?
Good, man. Thank you for having me on. I'm glad we finally got to meet up. I know we've been trying to do this for a couple of days now.
Yeah, I'm way behind on my cops and murders and protests and riots and soldiers interviews here. I've been waiting for you. Now I got you. So, so much is going on. I wanted to start with this article that you wrote for the Free Thought Project that I poached and ran at the Libertarian Institute as well, about the 400 other people who were already killed by the cops in America this year before they ever got around to murdering George Floyd, and what this really means for the American people, and say particularly for people who actually don't live that experience at all and might not even believe the number could be that high.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote that piece not to take away from the tragedy that was George Floyd's death, but to just, just capitalize on that moment that where people were paying attention to police brutality, and just to show them the actual scope of what we're dealing with here. You know, these people, they're protesting the death of George Floyd out there right now, but they're also protesting the hundreds of deaths that already took place this year at the hands of Americans, peace officers.
Do you have like a good ballpark estimate of what percentage of those are really unarmed and unwarranted versus people who, hey, you draw down on a cop, you know, that's what happens kind of situation?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the cases that I cited in that actual article was Michael Ramos, who was killed by Austin police on video.
Yeah.
He had someone made a report of an armed guy in a parking lot somewhere, and when the Austin police pulled up, they saw Michael Ramos there. Whether or not he was their guy remains unclear, because he was not armed. However, within just a couple of minutes of arriving on the scene, he was dead. And this guy got out of his car, raised his hands in the air, showed the cops that he had nothing in his waistband by lifting up his shirt, and was telling him he was not armed. And this is all on video, and he was asking him why they want him to, why they're there, what are they doing to him, and as he's asking him these questions, some crazed cop in the background unloads and dumps a beanbag round into him, and it freaked him out. I guess he thought he was being shot and killed, and so he jumped in his car and tried to drive away, and that's when they actually unloaded on him with the AR-15 and did kill him. And that's like one of so many other deaths that take place in this country on a regular basis. That we highlighted a few of them that were all unarmed in this article, and then that's what we're dealing with. You know, Michael Ramos had never been accused of a crime. You know, he may have fit the description of some guy that someone called in about on a 911 call, but he didn't do anything. He hadn't, he wasn't suspected of any other crime other than fitting the description of a guy that may or may not have committed a crime.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's why people are angry. That's why, shit's on fire right now.
Yeah. As far as the calling 911, it's almost like everybody knows that the wars are corrupt and the military-industrial complex, as even Ike Eisenhower said, and that we always lose and create more terrorists. And it's still just great to join the Army, though. And that's exactly what you should do, son, right as soon as you get out of high school, and all of this, because it's almost, because joining is almost, it's a different reality. It's a separate argument. It has no bearing on the actual reality of our foreign policy or any of these things. It's just an entirely separate issue. And it seems like the same way with 911, where if people had a kind of idea in their head from 30 years ago when they were a little kid or something about if you call 911, that's when the hero comes to rescue you or something like that. That no matter how many times they hear that somebody called 911 and some innocent person got killed by these guys acting essentially as armed rabid dogs, it doesn't matter. They still have this conception in their head that, well, what you do is you call 911 and that's when the hero comes and saves you. And they just can't seem to adjust to the reality that for whatever series of reasons, American police are the most destructive force in society. They're not superheroes here to protect you. They are here to spread violence, to take every opportunity they can to escalate and make matters worse for their own fun. You see it over and over and over again. In this case, as you said, it seems like the rookie in the back, accidentally fired maybe at this guy and set off the whole thing. But then he's just driving away and the other cop shoots him with an AR. Well, what's the excuse for that? That's entirely illegal. So even if, some kind of, as Donald Trump would say, even if she had choked with that first beanbag round, the other cop fires. No one says hold your fire. This is just how they are. And yet the lady who called 911 on the guy, you can guarantee that she, well, that's not my fault. That's their fault. Blah, 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 whatever. She's probably called 911 on people 3 times since then. And Americans will hear that story and then they'll still call 911 on each other all day long. Sucks.
It's true, man. And this
I should have formed that in the phrase of a question. Doesn't that suck?
Yeah, of course it does. We have the snitch society, and then it was brought to a heightened peak of state whenever this COVID-19 lockdown ensued, and people were snitching on their neighbors for coughing in their own backyards. This is like unprecedented times we're living in with things going on like that. And I was going to add before we started talking about the snitches is that the same department that killed Michael Ramos has been all over our blotter, in the last couple of weeks for how they've been treating the protesters. Mm-hmm. And, a 15-year-old boy who was sitting on a hillside watching the protesters was shot right above his eye. He's in ICU right now because some crazed cop on some rage just decided that he was going to put a rubber bullet in this dude's forehead.
And it was just a pot shot. I mean, people can see that footage where the kid's just standing there on this hillside, separate from everyone, doing nothing.
Right. And then there was another college kid, like a star student in political science who was attending like the University of Texas, I believe. And he was there to peaceful protest, hadn't committed any crime. Someone nearby him or something is what the police claim. Threw a water bottle at cops, so they unloaded rubber bullets in that direction, and they shot the wrong guy in the head, and it immediately knocked him out. He's still currently in ICU. But what's worse about his case is that there are 4 or 5 people like picked him up to try to get him out of harm's way. I mean, this looks like a war zone, dude. These people are carrying. This is all caught on video. It's all in the Free Thought Project that they can go see. They're carrying this guy like he's injured in a war zone, and as they're carrying him. The dude even had a red cross on his back, man. Like he was like part of he's a medic, and he was clearly, he clearly had on the markings to show, please don't shoot at these people, and cops opened fire on these people carrying an innocent person that they had just shot, trying to get him to safety, and they opened fire on him and shot several of the people that were carrying him.
Yep. In fact, I had even read a thing that said that the cops had said, bring him here, we'll get him medical attention.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then they did, and then they got ambushed,
essentially. And when they brought him to the department, they opened fire on him.
Yeah. Just sick. Yeah, that's my hometown, the APD, who have a reputation around here as being less worse than some of the others, if you believe it.
Yeah, I have a very good friend who's on the APD, actually, and I'm not going to say his name, but we did a story one time and I on him, and not on him, but on the APD, and we had to research their test scores, and he was the highest scoring one, like by magnitudes of, 5, like where everybody else is getting C's on their competence exams and everything. He's number one by a large margin, where he's doubling their scores.
Yeah. You know what? I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again. My worst friend, who is kind of a bad person, but I like him. I've known him for a long, long time. We're cab drivers together years ago. He went and joined up the sheriff's department, which has the Travis County sheriffs have a reputation as being a little bit less worse even than the APD, who are said to be less worse than, say, the Williamson County sheriffs. But anyway, they make you work at the jail for the first year before you get out there. And he didn't last through that. He just couldn't stand it. And he quit and went back to, driving a cab for a living, I guess.
Oh, wow.
Because of just how criminal it was.
Yeah.
And this is a guy who, he's a right winger enough that he's like, maybe not totally ideological about it, but at least he's extremely well educated in the history of George Washington and James Madison and the Bill of Rights and the whole theory that in America the people are born free and allow the government to exist to protect their rights and all of that. And here, these people to him, they're merely suspects. They're in the county lockup. They haven't, actually been convicted of anything. His job is protecting their rights. He may be an SOB and he may not like or respect them at all. But hey, the job is what the job is. Except that wasn't the job. The job was persecuting them and treating them all absolutely as terribly as possible for no reason all the time. And in just the very worst way. And he just couldn't stand it and had to leave. The worst guy I know was like, these cops are such scum. I just can't be around people like this.
That's telling, right?
Yeah. And I'm talking smack. I love this guy. He's an old friend of mine, but still, he's a bad person, So listen, now, so George Floyd, he touched it off. And you know what? People are on mandatory. You mentioned the lockdown there. People are on mandatory fired from work all across the country. Tens of millions of people. And then you have something like this to set off the spark. The long, hot summer begins now with the killing of George Floyd here. So, in fact, go ahead and talk a little bit about that. I mean, I'm sure there are people who are not on Twitter who haven't seen the video. They heard that some guy got killed. But can you talk a little bit about what happened to this guy? And then let's talk about the brush fire that got touched off by the thing here.
Yeah, for sure, man. So George Floyd was... yes, he had a really weak criminal past in another state, and but not in Minneapolis. And he was accused of trying to pass off a $20 bill that was counterfeit. Now, George Floyd worked in a nightclub, and I know from experience, when I used to bartend, we would get counterfeit bills all the time passed off because it's dark in there, and that's like a place where a lot of people go. So he might not even have known that he had a counterfeit bill, because he might have just gotten tipped out that night or whatever, and then just went to go spend it. And when they ran the ink on it, they saw that it was counterfeit or whatever. And that's
even presuming that that's right, Yeah, I mean, they change the currency so often that who knows? They might have just been like, what the hell is this? Like, who even knows if he actually passed a counterfeit bill, much less deliberately,
Right. He's not around to tell us that. But, I mean, to show that even if he was accused of it, he never ran, and he was waiting outside the store for police who showed up, and he was taken in without incident. He got out of his car. He was put in handcuffs. He was put down on the side of the road. He sat down there. He never fought the officers. Nothing. He never fought anybody. And this was all seen on the surveillance camera, not just the ones the viral video that that was taken by the woman who filmed the cops actually kill him. But the his initial taken into custody was completely peaceful. He never resisted or anything. And then they for some reason they didn't put him in the cruiser right by where they originally arrested him. They walked him across the street to where Derek Chauvin's cruiser was, and you can see on the surveillance camera that. He either trips and goes to the ground, or they throw him down, and that's when the other two cops held him down, and Derek Chauvin put his knee on his neck for the next 8 minutes until he died. And that was just one of the most grueling videos to watch. This guy begged for his life, for the last few minutes, and if you had all the apologists, if you could say I can't breathe, then you can breathe, which time and again we've proven that so many people who've been killed by the police, their last words were I can't breathe, and they in fact could not breathe. And that's what
And
happened.
seriously,
He was,
note for any cops listening to this that when the person you're strangling says, "Mommy," they're dying. They're dying. That's why they say that.
right. Yeah. Actually, Floyd called out for his mom while he was, being killed. And it come to find out his mom had died several years ago. And so it was like, like he knew he was dying, and it was, yeah. I mean, it's heart wrenching to know that was what he was doing as his last breaths were being taken from him. And there's several videos of Floyd too about like he was pretty active in trying to be like a good person and mentor people. He had some Facebook videos where he got on there and urged the young kids not to be violent against each other and, just get jobs and do good in your community. I mean, this guy was a good guy. He had made some mistakes earlier in his life, but he was just a good guy, and he tried to mentor his community and let people know, that it's up to them to create a better world. And now he's pushing up daisies.
Yeah. So this thing went viral. And the protests started, and now, I mean, it pretty much goes without saying when you have a protest movement this big about police abuse, especially against poor black people in their ghettos across the country, that there's going to be riots and collateral damage. But how would you kind of, proportionally, how would you measure the size of the protest movement versus the size of the rioting and the stealing? I mean, there have been some killings and stuff. It's pretty serious. At the same time, we're talking about every major city in America has been holding protests, and there have not been riots in all of them.
Just this morning, we put a story out. Someone sent us in a video of Minneapolis cops in like a caravan of their SUVs, and they're driving by completely peaceful protesters who are on the side of the road holding up signs, and they're spraying them with pepper spray. Like big clouds of pepper spray that shoot out like 20 feet. They're spraying all these people who are just peacefully protesting. That's the type of stuff that, that's the stuff that causes riots right there. They're trying, it's like they're actually trying to provoke these people into violence, and the people are resisting. Now that, don't get me wrong. Like there's a lot of bad actors also, like you said, that there's been people killed. There's some bad actors that couldn't care less about the death of George Floyd, who are exploiting these organic protests to loot and get shit that they want, and or just do whatever they want, like maybe take over rival neighborhood gangs or something like that. And so they're using these as cover to do their dirty work. But that should never take away from the peaceful protests that are happening all across the country. And it's also important to point out that that most of we've reported on a lot of instances in which the cops weren't confrontational and no rioting happened. And a lot of these other instances in which you see tear gas being fired at protesters, and protesters returning, like throwing them back at cops and throwing bottles and stuff at the cops. It's not because these protests turned violent and then the tear gas had to be deployed. It's because these cops are enforcing ridiculously early curfews, like at 4 p.m. in the afternoon in Los Angeles. And so when the people don't want to disperse and they want to keep practicing their constitutional right to, voice their concern about police brutality, that they don't disperse at 4 p.m. like with this unlawful order that they're being given, that the police then open fire on them with tear gas and rubber bullets. Mm-hmm. So they're not even violent. They're peacefully protesting, exercising their constitutional right, and the cops are opening fire and tear gas with them to get them to disperse because they're violating some ridiculously unconstitutional curfew.
Yeah.
So
we ran a thing at the Institute where an eyewitness wrote that about Philadelphia, where they're just having a big protest, and then here come the cops on horseback charging into the crowd and causing a big riot, and then the reaction from there, and then now they have their excuse to roll in with the rest of their force. And of course, in fact, there's another article we ran by Bradley Thomas where he had a quote from the cop talking essentially, to paraphrase, about, well, of course, we would rather attack the protesters all day and let the rioters go because the rioters and looters are dangerous. So we don't want to put our cops in danger. So we're going to go ahead and let the looters burn down whatever they want, steal whatever they want. And we're going to focus on hurting these people who are out there protesting with their signs about police abuse instead, because they're just the lower hanging fruit and we're a bunch of cowards.
Yeah. Telling, right?
Yeah.
Kind of sounds like the reason they pursue the drug war instead of actually go after actual criminals like murderers and rapists.
Yeah. And even then, on the drug war, they focus on pot dealers instead of cocaine dealers and heroin dealers, because the pot dealers are easier to fight, you know?
Exactly, because they're just chill people who want to have and sell a plant to willing customers. Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, here they are, you know, burning down city blocks. And here the cops admit that, like, well, what do you want me to do? Put my officers' lives in danger to arrest people who are burning down our city? Of course not. That would be reckless, you know?
Right. Instead, we'll open fire on a peaceful crowd, rubber bullets and tear gas grenades, and maybe kill some of them in the process.
Yep. And, of course, all the arson fires, especially arson fires at night, is the number one best public relations for police that you could ever invent. You know, for everybody who's not in on the riot, that's scary looking. And so it's good for the cops to go ahead and let things like that spin out of control, so that, just like in V for Vendetta, the rest of the city can remember why they need us, you know, because of the disruptions that they cause.
It's actually having the opposite effect in Minneapolis, though. You know, that you had on Sunday, they had 9 of the 12 city council members hold a rally, I guess, in the park, and they all came out and said that they're now working on plans to disband the entire Minneapolis police force and replace it with something completely different, community oriented, which could be awesome. And it also could, you know, it's almost like the government is never actually gets rid of anything bad and replaces it with anything good. So I'm kind of skeptical of that, but I do like the talk of removing a police force. That's always awesome, you know, and
absolutely.
letting that.
It does raise a lot of questions, though, right? I mean, I guess, first of all, if they might abolish this police department and then just institute an entirely new, different one right in its place. Or they could say, well, we're just going to leave it all up to the county sheriff's department, which is going to turn around and hire all these same cops back again, probably.
Right.
Or, and you know, I could see definitely, I mean, presuming you really have these social justice leftists seize control of the city government in this fashion, and they're really determined to send a social worker instead of a cop as much as they possibly can. I mean, that could be great, right? Somebody's having a heroin overdose. The cops don't get called for that. You know, right. The EMTs come out, maybe some, you know, here's a flyer for an addiction program. But, you know, something like that, that could be, I got to say, here I was kind of picking around the edges saying, let's get rid of qualified immunity and these kinds of things. But if they want to talk about, you know, essentially ending policing, ending the enforcement of all kinds of laws, I think they could go really far with that, except, you know, of course, there's still the question of violent felonies that people need to be protected from one way or the other. And what's their plan for that? And I don't know if you saw this, Matt. I've just, our allies, the leftists on this issue, on CNN or one of these, I saw a clip. Somebody sent me a clip where they're interviewing one of the leaders of the Black Lives Matter group in Minneapolis and saying, okay, so when you abolish the police, or it might have even been one of the councilwomen, I'm not sure. When you do abolish the police, okay, so then what happens if someone tries to break in my house in the middle of the night? Who do I call then? You know? And it was actually like an honest question, not like trying to just already have the answer built in. You know what I mean? It was like an honest question. Well, so what's going to be the alternative for that? And the answer was, that question comes from a place of privilege. And you have no right to think that you should have a security force to help keep you safe in your home at night. You know, how dare you, white lady, TV reporter, you know, rich capitalist person or whatever. So, yeah, they're not going to get very far with that kind of thing, because ultimately these questions aren't decided by the city council of Minneapolis. They're decided by the state legislature of Minnesota, and they're not going to completely turn, you know, security over to the sociology department at the local college or whatever seems to be going on here,
No, not at all. And that could go. I mean, like you said, that you gave a good example of what could happen if if someone has a heroin overdose and they send some kind of counselor over there to maybe get them into some kind of rehab program instead of locking them in a cage. But it could also go in like an extremely a terrible place with, we've seen some of these social justice movements that are based completely in reactionary and emotional thinking that have no logic or reason behind them and are entirely dangerous and anti-freedom at all levels. And that would be pretty scary to see someone like that with a badge and a gun. Like I saw a tweet on over the weekend. It was hilarious. I don't remember it word for word, but it stated, but without the police, who's going to protect you from plastic straws? And that's it completely called out like so many of the leftist people calling for the abolishing the police, which I happen to agree with, but they also they also use the police to implement all these permitting things and these and plastic straw laws and just arbitrary anti-freedom type
all those fees and all those
yeah.
taxes, all those fines. I mean, can you imagine what would happen to every leftist program in America without the cops there to beat us over the head?
That gun to be able to pull off your entire mandatory way of thinking, and they just don't realize that, But that's the discussion that I'm trying to push out there,
what I kind of wish that. The guy with the straw tweet would be quiet and go ahead and just let them abolish some police departments while we're at it right now and let them figure out that now they don't have the force to implement the rest of their stupid crap later, is probably better.
Yeah, well, he also said who would take the guns, too. Said who would take the guns and the plastic straws if you abolish the police.
That's funny. Yeah, I saw a right-winger tweeting that, this is all Obama's plot to disarm the police and the citizens, too, so that then only the government will have guns.
Well, the police are the government.
Yeah, but anyway. Right-wingers on Twitter, man, they don't think things through much better than the Black Lives Matter types most of the time. And speaking of which, I mean, and this is such a huge point that you wrote about that I'm a bit surprised. I always complain that Black Lives Matter is kind of missing the point. I mean, it really should be accountability for killer cops. That is the bottom line, and isn't that what's important? If we're going to abolish racial prejudice as the long way around to abolishing police brutality, it's going to be a while. It seems like there are other things that could be done sooner, but they do talk about accountability from time to time anyway, that yes, this would be big progress. But they do not pick up on what you call the elephant in the room here, the most obvious leading cause of police abuse of all people, and probably especially black people in society, and that is the war on drugs. So tell us about that great article that you wrote, and then also I'm curious why you think that is, because it seems like, you got to end the war on drugs. What do you think is the number one excuse for all of these intrusions? And on all levels, too,
Right. I wrote that article to do two things, to call out the people who kept saying all lives matter, all lives matter. I wanted to try to give them a bit of perspective so they may have some empathy into why people are saying Black Lives Matter. It's not because they're saying Black Lives Matter more than white lives or any of that. It's because black people experience a completely separate form of justice in the United States, and it's shown statistically by all the numbers. Black people are disproportionately killed more than white people. They're 4 times more likely to have police violence escalated against them in the exact same type situations than their white counterpart. It's the racial disparity is a real thing. It's measurable, and it shows us that the system is far from equal. It does not dole out justice equally like it should. And so that's why there's Black Lives Matter. Everybody like there's the tweet I cited in there from comedian Arthur Chu. He said, "Do people who change Black Lives Matter to All Lives Matter run through a cancer fundraiser going, there are other diseases too?"
Yeah.
No, it's just like that. It's trying to take away from why they're saying Black Lives Matter. There's an implicit "to" at the end of that phrase, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Black Lives Matter too.
But it does suck though that
we know that, but our lives are being disproportionately affected by the police state far more than yours. So that's why we need to draw attention to this.
It is unfortunate though that they couldn't name the movement Black Lives Matter too, because then that sounds whiny and weak, right?
Right.
So they had to drop the "to" and, like you say, just leave it implicit. But if people are unwilling to infer it, then they won't get it. And then they react in the way that you described, where they think that the slogan means black people are special, not you, which was never the thing. It was black people are just as special as you. That's all. But it's kind of custom made to be misunderstood, unfortunately, really is.
Right.
And
yeah,
it gives
it's
even people who are disingenuous, it gives them a great out,
Right. And it's easy to be easily dismissed by those who don't even want to to have this conversation. Like, oh, you said Black Lives Matter, that you're irrelevant to me now. That's racist, but it really isn't. But so that was the first part I wanted to do in that article. The second part I wanted to do was the point I wanted to make was that Black Lives Matter, they want to talk solutions, and like their main solution that they're pointing to right now is to defund the police, which is a really good solution. It's one aspect to a multifaceted problem that we have, but that's a long way down the road. Like you said, the Minneapolis Police Department, they're trying to do that right now, and that's going to all go through the state, and it's not going to look like what they think it's going to look like. It could arguably make things a lot worse if you go through this half-cocked and don't actually have a plan to do this. And it doesn't appear that they do. But one thing that the Black Lives Matter groups could do right now, which would end 80% of police interactions that turn violent, is to advocate for the end of the drug war right now. If the drug war was ended today, the cops wouldn't be shaking down kids on the street if they smell weed. They wouldn't be pulling people over, suspecting them of carrying a plant in their car. They wouldn't be stopping and frisking people, thinking that they might get to fish for some other crime about that they may have some kind of contraband in their pocket. That's what all these police interactions are about. Are the majority of them anyway are for cops fishing for substances deemed illegal by the state. We're talking 70% of incarcerations. Don't quote me on that, but it's pretty close to there. I don't have these numbers in front of me, but I'm pretty sure it's roughly 70% of the people in the prison population right now are in there because of drugs. When you arrest somebody for drugs and put them in prison for a substance that they chose to ingest or sell to willing customers that's deemed illegal by the state, then that puts a permanent record or a permanent scar on their record. So they become unemployable. Then they have to go back to crime just to make a living when they get out of jail. And then they learn about all these other bad things while they're in jail. And it leads to recidivism, which is when it's the likeliness that you're going to return back into the system after you've already been marked into it. So if you're disproportionately targeting black communities, which we know that the U.S. justice system does do, you're actually guaranteeing future crime from that community, because we see that the effects of recidivism that guarantees that people will end up back into the system. So it's feeding the drug war is feeding the prison industrial complex with black bodies. They're keeping the prisons full at 99% capacity, and they're doing so because they're enforcing prohibition. And we obviously, your listeners are going to know that prohibition never works. It never removes the demand for a product. It just pushes that demand into the black market, creates crime, and it creates violence from the criminals trying to maintain their monopolies on the supply lines. And so that's another talking point of the right is, well, they're all the Black Lives Matter people are silent on all the black people killing black people because 98% of the black people killed are killed by black people. But they completely ignore the fact that that's not mutually exclusive, and that the reason that they're killing black people is because they're participating in an illegal drug trade that's kept illegal by the government that creates this crime and makes black people kill black people because they're at war with each other. There's rival gangs, there's criminal gangs that protect the supply lines and territories in all these towns like Chicago. And they're literally at war with one another because the government has made a substance illegal and created an entire market that drives criminal behavior and violence.
They also ignore that black people complain about it all the time. It's not like they're silent about that. Of course they talk about that,
Yeah. Yeah. So that's.
But now,
that's
what do you
problem
think
that I
is
have
what do you think is the reason for the reluctance behind the Black Lives Matter types to get behind ending the war on drugs? It's such a simple argument,
It really is, man. It's and it's obviously one you can tell I'm passionate about, but it's I have no idea. It'd be speculation, but I mean it's almost conspiratorial for them. It's irresponsible. It does nothing to help their cause. In fact, it does everything to harm their cause. At the fact that they're not doing this, that you have other groups like Drug War Alliance and LEAP, Law Enforcement Against Prohibition, that have been advocating these solutions for years. If they could join forces with Black Lives Matter and push this same ending the drug war agenda, this might have been taken care of 5 years ago.
And in fact, if Black Lives Matter would invoke conservative type and libertarian type and ex-law enforcement type groups that take these positions as the ultimate proof that they must be right because even these right-wingers agree with them about it, then that's the perfect talking point. Hell, William F. Buckley wrote in the National Review that we ought to give up the stupid drug war back in like 1988 or something, man. When Public Enemy was still new.
Ron Paul's been saying it for decades.
Yeah. I mean, of course, the libertarians have said so all along, and I'm sure that there are some on the left who've been doing great work on this all along too. I don't mean to dismiss that, but it seems like and, people are afraid to say something that sounds too controversial, like legalize heroin. But what the hell? You're talking about abolishing police departments. You think that's not shocking to people's imaginations when they've never thought of such a concept before in their lives? Go ahead and explain it. Actually, we'd be better off without them. No, really. Same thing with the drug laws. That, for all the problems that come with the abuse of opiates, go on. The problems of opiate prohibition are far worse. And especially when, as you said, it can not work. So you should not try, for all the collateral damage when there's no possibility of success. That's sinful, man. That's wrong. And so find a better way. And you know what? This is the thing that bothers me, too, is every grown adult in America, every single one of us knows the solution to drug addiction. And that is that you have recovered addicts help current addicts recover. Simple as that. It has nothing to do with nailing them to the wall or burying them in a cage under the ground somewhere until they start acting right. It never works.
No, you can't cure addiction with the barrel of a gun. And that's as simple as that. I mean, we can. It actually has, like I pointed out, it has the opposite effect. We have the highest rate of drug overdoses in the history of America going on right now, and we have the cops have the most resources, air quotes, to actually go after that is what they consider. Because if they're like, we need bigger guns, we need so you got MRAPs rolling down the street right now to level houses that someone suspected of growing weed in, and it's not doing a damn thing to stop demand. It's making the problem worse. You have worse drugs coming back out into the market now. You have fentanyl, which is deadly. One of our writers, Jack Burns at Free Thought Project, his son just recently died 2 weeks ago from a fentanyl overdose.
Oh man.
And this is all stemmed by the war on drugs. This is these fentanyl lines are coming. This is it's like a bathtub drug, It's like these people are making some really ridiculously strong and deadly stuff because you can't just grow heroin in the United States, Yeah. So all these synthetic things are coming through on all the different black market streams, and people have no idea what they're doing. And they can, I'm not saying like it's responsible to use heroin on a daily basis or anything like that, but regular heroin is far safer than any kind of fentanyl, and fentanyl is a direct reaction to the prohibition of heroin.
Yeah.
And that's all that they just keep making these substances illegal, and new ones keep coming, and they're more dangerous and
it's the
deadly
misdosing, right? Like fentanyl's perfectly safe if you take the right amount of it. You know, you go to the doctor, they give you that stuff for certain surgeries or whatever. Doesn't kill you. It only kills you because you don't know what the percent is. So you're used to shooting this much heroin, but now you're shooting this much heroin plus fentanyl, and it's enough to stop your heart or stop your breathing, you know?
Right.
And that's the thing. And you know what, too? Just the sheer number, tens of thousands of these deaths, goes to show that these are good people dying. You do not have to be some scumbag to be addicted to drugs. It happens to good people, you know? So the rest of us should not be writing them off, you know? Same with black people. You know what? You might not be part of the black minority, but they keep telling you very loudly that they live in terror of the SWAT team night raid. Believe them, you know? Right. Care about them for a minute. Same thing here. You know, it might not be your cousin that died of a fentanyl overdose, but it could have been.
That's it's so true, man. So like Jack Burns' son, he was the star, like he was the star athlete of his high school. He I think he had a football scholarship and went to his college, and he was still in college when all this happened. And here's the thing, this is how the system actually created his fentanyl and heroin problem. He was on Adderall for ADHD, and the Adderall was causing him some kind of heart palpitation disorder. And so he spoke with his doctor. They decided that it would be a good idea for him to get off the Adderall, and he could try medical cannabis in place of that. And it took the state he lives in. I'm not going to give away any of this information. I don't want the family to I don't want anybody to know who it is. So the state that they live in, it takes a while to apply for the medical cannabis card. And his son didn't care. He started doing he started smoking weed before the medical card was approved. And I think it was like the day before he got his card, he was caught with like a joint in his car. And they have like these mandatory laws in this state, and so he was sentenced to drug court, which is for those who aren't familiar with drug court, it's like basically it's just a scam by the state to make you pay them thousands and thousands of dollars to not go to jail for a drug offense. And you have to go to these meetings at the courthouses, and they're full of drug addicts. And at one of these places, that's where his son met, I guess, a really pretty girl who did heroin and couldn't resist, like her request to do heroin with him. And then that's what got him addicted to heroin, and that's what eventually led to his untimely death less than a year later. So man. It's pretty crazy, man, because he would have probably never came in contact with anybody that ever did heroin in his life, until he was sentenced to go interact with other people that were that did harder drugs than he ever did.
Yeah, like ISIS being formed at Camp Bucca,
right.
Bring all these guys together. It's terrible. It's completely, if there was just a book about the collateral damage of the drug wars that were all, somehow tangential to whatever op the cops were launching at any particular time, it'd be a stack to the moon. It's just unbelievable the amount of suffering that has, taken place against all kinds of people, but especially the poorest and racial minorities. And because, of course, cops know that they have, legally they have immunity, but politically they have immunity for taking out, their sport on poor black people. Whereas if they pick on the rich white side of town, it'll get shut down before too long. They start taking, rich white kids with promising futures away on cocaine charges. People with juice are going to push back against that. but they can pick on poor black people all day and get away with it, and they know it. So I'm sure that sure looks a lot, no different than guys wearing Klan hoods to the people on the receiving end of it. But I think it's a lot more about economic and political economic incentives than it is just outright bigotry. Although obviously it's all mixed together.
Right. Well, I mean, there's a really chilling video of it was some interview with about 12 or 14 NYPD cops who were all minorities and who all came forward and told the world that they targeted minorities as well because that was the easiest ones. And one of the cops even said that, like, it was a black cop talking about how they went to the black communities and the Latino communities to arrest these people for drugs because it was easier. And he's like, if we showed up at, in the white neighborhoods and we try to do that, we'd be shut down instantly. So we couldn't do that. And they said, we are the predators. They are the prey. And this is minorities that are targeting minorities because they know if they target these upper middle class areas with the same bullshit laws that for victimless crimes, then they'd be shut down immediately.
Yep.
That's a sad state of affairs. I mean, that is the white privilege, the racial disparity. That is the whole system. When the system is so racially connected that even minority cops have to prey on minorities and know that they're doing it because they can't prey on the rich people. That's when some shit's messed up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a big part of it is just even the existence of these police unions where, hey, when the crime rate falls, these guys should be getting laid off in droves. But instead, the whole thing is just a racket. They got to find things to do. You can't expect them to actually just provide basic security services in response to, legitimate 911 emergencies or what have you, and prosecution of felony cases, which probably most people would go ahead and agree to without a problem. They got to find all these other things to do, all these other laws to enforce, and all the rest of this stuff. And, once you're in the system, good luck, man. You're in probation for 5 years, you're going to get revoked and go back. And then you're going to get another 5-year probation after they let you out and this and that. They're going to fine you, as you talk about, make you go to these classes. How are you supposed to keep your job when you have to take the bus across town to go do another government piss test again and all of these things? And they just completely ruin people's lives with this stuff. It's like that movie Brazil or something. We're just the lowest level bureaucrats, idiocracy level bureaucrats, just completely smashing you and destroying your life over roach in your ashtray or whatever gets it started,
Right. Window tint or fucking seatbelt violation.
Yeah. Or an outright lie.
Yeah, or just a bad cop.
Hey, y'all, check it out. The Libertarian Institute, that's me and my friends, have published 3 great books this year. First is No Quarter, The Ravings of William Norman Grigg. He was the best one of us. Now he's gone, but this great collection is a truly fitting legacy for his fight for freedom. I know you'll love it. Then there's Coming to Palestine by the great Sheldon Richman. It's a collection of 40 important essays he's written over the years about the truth behind the Israel-Palestine conflict. You'll learn so much and highly value this definitive libertarian take on the dispossession of the Palestinians and the reality of their brutal occupation. And last but not least is the great Ron Paul, The Scott Horton Show Interviews, 2004 through 2019. Interview transcripts of all of my interviews of the good doctor over the years on all the wars, money, taxes, the police state, and more. So how do you like that? Pretty good, right? Find them all at libertarianinstitute.org/books. Hey, you guys may know I'm involved in some Libertarian Party politics this year, but you can't hear or read about that at the Libertarian Institute due to 501c3 rules and such. So make sure to sign up for the interviews feed at scotthorton.org and keep an eye on my blog at scotthorton.org/stress. Hey y'all, Scott here. If you want a real education in history and economics, you should check out Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Tom and a really great group of professors and experts have put together an entire education of everything they didn't teach you in school but should have. Follow through from the link in the margin at scotthorton.org for Tom Woods' Liberty Classroom. Okay, so, but now, let me ask you a little bit about the whole thing about Donald Trump calling out the military and all of that. I mean, my initial impression with this thing was just, I don't know the exact numbers, but I kind of have in my gut an estimation of how much National Guard force the governors have without any federal help. And it seemed like it's plenty. And I can't imagine a situation where you would, really need, U.S.
Military.
Army to help instill order. Like maybe if somebody nuked St. Louis or something, like under what circumstances could anyone consider, actually calling out the military? I wonder if you think that was just a big bluff or what? Well, I guess not.
I don't
you
think
got
so,
you
dude.
got
That
the highest
man is
generals and people
batshit.
distancing themselves from it and all this.
Yeah, but Donald Trump is crazy, man. I mean, he when the looting starts, the shooting starts. Are you kidding me? You're threatening to extrajudicially murder people for a suspected property theft? And
He's
and
just
you're
the
gonna put
president
that
of
on
the
Twitter?
United States,
Dude, that's utter insanity. I mean, I never really gave a shit about any of the Russian conspiracy things against Trump or anything like that. But him tweeting that out last weekend was, I mean, that's grounds for impeachment. That's grounds for putting him in jail right then and there. I mean, he's talking about with removing due process and executing Americans in the street for a misdemeanor crime. That's unprecedented. No president has ever said that before. And it just shows to the state of the affairs in the land of the free that we have right now that we're dealing with. It's utter insanity. And we know that he would have invoked the military. I mean, look what he did just for a photo op, and he cleared the protesters in Lafayette Square. And then the press secretary comes on and says, no, we never used tear gas but that was bullshit. Well, there was all kinds of people on the ground filming at the time when they were peaceful in Lafayette Square when the tear gas canisters came flying in, and then they were cleared out with rubber bullets so the president could walk across the street and take a picture holding the Bible. That's some. I mean, I hate to do it, invoke the Hitler, analogy, but that is some Hitler shit. That's crazy, off the wall, just flexing your might for no other reason but because you can, and you're doing so. While doing so, you're trampling the rights of people that were peacefully protesting that exact.
Yeah. The only difference is he's so much more of a flake than Hitler, It all just seems so disingenuous. I mean, on the other hand, somebody set fire to that church. Man, that's, this is, again, back to the riots, it serves discredit to your whole "we just want our rights" narrative that when you're burning down one of the oldest churches in America, and the one that all these politicians have gone to, that matters the most to them, and symbolic across from the White House, 200-year-old thing. Yeah, not good. In fact, that might even have been COINTELPRO stuff right there. It was so bad, I don't know. Although you can't sell these leftists short. They have plenty of bad ideas.
Yeah. There's some crazy stuff going on out there, man. I'm glad it's not anywhere near me.
But now it was clear, though, right, that the riots aren't going to last long enough for troops to be called out anywhere. Clearly, the Secretary of Defense and the chiefs are going to be telling him, no, sir, we're not putting the army. We don't need the army. There's not a single neighborhood in this country where things are so out of control that the National Guard can't handle it. Sorry. I mean, there's no need to do it. So, and then that's played out, right? I guess there's still some very low-level rioting in some places, but mostly it's all given way to peaceful protests now, correct?
Yeah, that's what seems to be going on. It seems that the mass violence is not mass violence, but the destruction is looking like it's taking an optimistic turn for the better, for sure.
But I mean, I've seen some of these huge marches. I think one was in Philadelphia and San Francisco across the Golden Gate Bridge, and some of these things. It's really something else. And again, everybody's got nothing to do. Go out to show up to these. In fact, it's the only thing they're allowed to do socially with each other, right? Otherwise, they get a ticket, or worse, get slammed on the curb.
Yeah, that's
Like,
a
hey,
great
what are you
point,
two
man.
doing
It's
standing there talking? You better either protest or set something on fire or I'm taking you to jail.
oh man, that's sad but true.
Man. All right, well, listen, I meant what I said at the beginning of this thing, that I think the Free Thought Project is so important, and you ruin my day every day with this thing, man. The afternoon email, I hope everyone will subscribe to it, as I wrote in my last article for antiwar.com too. And hey, look, check out the world from somebody else's point of view. Hear people getting their heads smashed, oftentimes all the way open by the cops, every single day in this country. And it's almost unbelievable, except that it's all true. And that's thefreethoughtproject.com. Thank you again very much, Matt.
Thank you, Scott. Means a lot, brother. Take care.
The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.